Okay, kia ora and welcome back to session 6 of our workshop. Now we'll be focusing on the relevance of natural living. For those of you just joining us today, please be aware that you can post questions any time in the question box. For our panelists, you won't be able to see that question box, so you can post questions in the chat box and we'll pick up on those. So now it's my absolute pleasure to invite Dr. Kate Flay from Hong Kong City University to join us and chair this session. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Kate. Thank you so much. So I'm delighted to be chairing our session 6. We've got some great talks lined up that I'm sure everyone will really enjoy. So just a reminder to pop your questions in the question box as we go along, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So I am delighted to introduce our first speaker, Vittoria Elliott from the Wild Animal Initiative in Germany and the USA. Will be speaking on the naturalness of behaviour.
I am Vittoria Elliott, and I am the Science Director for Wild Animal Initiative, an organisation concerned with the welfare of wild animals. I'm going to talk about the naturalness of welfare. Zoos house animals of various species for a number of reasons. They provide entertainment, they can inspire people to consider the lives of wild animals by allowing them to get in close proximity, they can educate the public about the lives of wild animals and help researchers to better understand the behaviours, ecology, and needs of wild animals. And more recently, they have served as conservation ambassadors, providing important support systems for conservation efforts. There is debate around the validity of these various potential functions and whether animals should be brought into captivity at all. Whether you agree with them or not, the fact is there are wild animals in captivity, which cannot simply be released into the wild. Zoos therefore need to consider the welfare of the animals in their care and how to provide a captive environment that facilitates thriving. Naturalness has been included as one of the key components for providing for animal welfare in captivity in the past. Under this criterion, efforts to replicate wild or natural conditions are made. These can include providing foliage and a substrate similar to those found in an animal's native environment. In some cases, this endeavour is easily achieved, whilst in others it may be futile. For example, suitable conditions for naked mole rats that live in small, confined spaces and low light may be relatively easy to replicate in captive conditions. By contrast, attempting to replicate the natural conditions of space and heterogeneity that a bear experiences is less feasible. Further, it is not clear whether providing these conditions would even meet their welfare needs. In order for animals to experience positive welfare, there are certain species-specific needs that must be met. Some of these needs are driven exclusively by interactions with their environment and only need to be met when an animal is in those environments, whilst others occur irrespective of their environment and must always be met. Determining which needs are driven and exclusively met by environmental conditions and which can be provided for in captive environments can help identify how to fulfill animals' welfare needs. In the last decade, most zoos have started developing enclosures, stimuli, and/or enrichment opportunities to address concerns about welfare. However, their design and impact need to be objectively evaluated to understand their genuine welfare impact. Some behaviors are performed because they are a requirement for survival, such as roaming long distances to forage or access resources. While these are natural behaviors in the wild, they may be associated with increased stress as a result of feeding insecurity. In these cases, a so-called natural behavior serves a functional role, but it would not necessarily be of value to provide conditions to allow animals to replicate it in captivity, as it would be unlikely to provide positive welfare. On the other hand, some natural behaviors appear to serve a function, whilst potentially also providing a positive experience and enjoyment. Play may serve both to train young animals and provide enjoyment to the individuals. Grooming is a necessary requirement for removing parasites and other debris in the wild, but may also serve to provide a pleasurable experience through contact, interaction, and preening. Although typically associated with positive experiences, they are not necessarily always a reliable indicator of positive welfare, and can in fact indicate poor welfare. Stereotypies and displacement behaviors are generally natural behaviors that are displaced or overperformed. For example, both playing and grooming can be seen in animals that are showing other indications of stress. Grooming or play can turn to aggression, and self-grooming can be performed to the point of causing self-harm. As such, so-called natural behaviors are not necessarily always good and can even be indicators of negative welfare. Such confusing relationships make straightforward assessment of welfare complicated and demonstrate the need for a combined approach for accurately and systematically assessing the welfare of individual animals. To understand the naturalness and its potential as a poor criterion for welfare for enclosures, I'm using a case study from bears. Most species are solitary and nomadic, often ranging long distances to access scarce resources. In the wild, they explore large open areas, often moving through varying habitats. To truly replicate these natural conditions of the wild environments that bears inhabit would require providing sufficient space for them to roam. However, doing so would not be conducive to public viewing. Therefore, natural-looking enclosures are used and are therefore considerable compromise. Whilst they may provide positive stimulus for bears in the form of pools, trees, and other artifacts that bears can interact with, less natural enclosures can also provide these same stimulus with the provision of objects that do not have a natural-looking appearance, but that provide similar welfare outcomes. Studies suggest that by including views, regular interactions, and other feeding and play enrichments, a typical unnatural-looking environment can be as enriching for bears as one that appears to be more natural. There has been seemingly widespread acceptance that naturalness, as it applies to both behaviors and environments, is not a valid approach for measuring or assessing the welfare quality of an enclosure, nor for assessing the well-being of animals in captivity. However, the transference of this acceptance to practice, according to the literature, has lagged behind. We sought to understand how prevalent this lag in practice truly is, insomuch as it was possible from reviewing reports in the published literature in lieu of being able to directly assess practices in zoos. We also sought to understand or infer what might be the cause of any lag. We also looked to establish whether a literature review approach could help to address some of the needs for understanding these factors, and sought to understand what alternatives could be used to assess welfare, and what barriers might exist to employ them. Finally, we considered the implications of our findings for the welfare of animals in the wild. A more direct approach for determining whether natural persists as a criterion used by zoos might be to conduct surveys with zoo personnel or to review reports from zoos. However, some investigators have reported challenges with conducting interviews with zoo personnel because of time constraints for interviews and a wariness of zoo personnel for sharing reports that concern welfare due to real or perceived challenges and potential negative feedback from animal welfare and anti-zoo movement. We therefore sought to determine whether a more indirect approach could be successful at validating and providing appropriate insights. Before attempting a systematic review, we wanted to test whether this approach would be valid and valuable, and therefore restricted our initial search to only 50 papers. We selected 50 papers, 50 recent studies that assessed the welfare of animals in zoos, and reviewed them and assessed whether natural was included as a criterion for understanding the conditional welfare of the study subjects. For consistency, the studies reviewed were restricted to mammals, and we excluded any results that did not directly relate to animals in zoos. We evaluated the first 50 papers that were listed according to relevance to our search terms of welfare and zoo, and then each paper was assessed for the prevalence of nature or natural in association with the welfare condition or environment of the animals. Our preliminary results suggested that from the 50 studies, 12 studies originally selected were considered to be ambiguous with regard to the use of natural as a criterion for welfare assessment, in that they mentioned nature or natural environments but did not directly associate them with the welfare of the animals, instead suggesting inferences. For example, in their natural habitat was used as a comparative, but not used as a direct indicator of welfare. In some cases, although studies included welfare as a key word and referred to it in the abstract or title, and the content of the paper focused on time budget and behaviors in relation to animal care, in lieu of directly making any addressing or providing conclusions in relation to animal welfare. 10 studies that investigated welfare of animals in zoos used exclusively behavioral or physiological indicators of welfare, and did not mention natural or naturalistic environments as a relevant criterion for determining good or poor welfare. The 28 studies remaining referenced natural or naturalistic as a criterion for assessment of animal enclosures. Of those 14 studies directly associated naturalness as a positive criterion for meeting welfare requirements compared to 8 studies where the association was only directly related to enclosure quality but not explicitly used as an indicator of welfare, and 6 studies where it was ambiguous, i.e. it was not clear whether naturalness was being used to indicate welfare. Our results therefore suggest that the use of natural does persist in some circumstances. We also found that the persistence correlated with the species, with the welfare and enclosure suitability for large charismatic animals being less likely to include natural as a characteristic for determining welfare. It also correlated with the location of establishments, with larger, more modern establishments in Western developed countries being less likely to use natural as a criterion, with conservation efforts where natural was less likely to be used as a criterion when conservation was reported as an objective. And we also found that natural was more often, 14 out of 14 cases, associated or applied to enclosure quality and its welfare suitability, rather than it as a direct relation to assessing the welfare value of individual animals, only 2 out of 14. Although we do not consider that our selection of studies was completely objective or inclusive, it is possible that with some modifications our study design could potentially be used going forward as a baseline to determine whether the use of nature or natural as a factor for assessing the welfare value of enclosures persists going forward longer term. We found that naturalness in relation to enclosure quality was associated with a desire to address public perceptions, which may explain why naturalness persists as a value for assessing enclosure suitability, despite it not being a suitable welfare indicator, i.e. with the intention of maintaining public support. Among those evaluated, some studies also used public perceptions as a means for scoring the welfare of animals, and in these cases, naturalness of the enclosure was included in every case as an evaluation criteria, also potentially explaining why it was persisting. What are the alternatives? Whilst insights from wild animal behaviours are valuable for understanding the welfare of wild animals in zoos, use of natural in isolation is a poor criteria for both stimuli and enclosure design. Recent studies have shown that opportunities for interactions and key components of control have a seemingly greater impact on welfare than overall environment for many species. Therefore, placing greater emphasis on allowing animals control and choice over what they do and how they do it could potentially improve their welfare. Gaining a better understanding of what choices to offer and how to provide control in a safe and responsible way should be informed by a better understanding of wild animal behaviors, motivations, and what animals' lives are like in the wild. Placing greater emphasis on subjective experiences and defining indicators of enjoyment, such as facial expressions and hormonal values, should be preferred. More research is, however, required to better define these values. What are the implications for management of wild animals? For animals in captivity, there is a general consensus in theory and increasingly in practice that replicating or creating natural conditions is not necessarily positive for animal welfare. Thus, maintaining natural conditions is neither an inherently valid criteria, nor is it necessarily positive for welfare. Even if we only have a moral imperative to intervene on behalf of the welfare of animals that humans have impacted, arguably there are few animals for which that is not true. Aggregation of animals into reducing habitats places more animals in direct contact with humans. Even in the absence of direct human contact, aggregation can also increase disease transmission, competition for resources, and conflict, and bring about poor welfare for animals as a result of human action. Conservation frequently intervenes on behalf of nature, whilst wildlife management is by definition concerned with intervening in nature. I will leave you with one last thought. Natural conditions can be both positive and negative for wildlife, but if natural is not an inherent factor preventing humans from intervening, should we not also consider the ways that we can help to improve the welfare of wild animals in the wild as well as when we put them behind bars? Lastly, just to say thank you for listening and hope that you enjoyed the talk and it stimulates the valuable conversation.
good to go, Kate.
Thank you so much, Victoria. That was a really excellent talk and perfectly to time. So I would like to introduce our next speaker, which is Kate Hartcher from Global Food Partners Australia, who will be speaking on the challenges and solutions for egg producers in transitioning to and maintaining cage-free systems. Now remember to keep those questions coming, so pop them in the question box as you're thinking of them.
Hi, my name is Kate Hartcher. I'm the Senior Animal Scientist with Global Food Partners based in Singapore and an adjunct lecturer with the University of Queensland in Australia. Our study was on the challenges and solutions for egg producers in transitioning to and maintaining cage-free systems, and this was across China, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines. We had a truly multinational research team for this work, comprising Dr. Michelle Sinclair, co-lead investigator with the University of Queensland and Harvard Law School, and our in-country collaborators who disseminated the questionnaires and interacted directly with the producers, who were Lisa Yang in China with the University of Edinburgh, Professor Ali Agus and Professor Iman Soesanto, both in Indonesia, Dr. Shuichi Ito in Japan, Professor Zulkifli Idris in Malaysia, Dr. Jyotamat Jatuchai in Thailand, and Associate Professor Maria Catalina de Luna in the Philippines. I'd also like to acknowledge the funders for this work, the Tiny Beam Fund, and the egg producers who volunteered their time in the interest of contributing to the knowledge and development of their industry. In my talk today, I'll give some background information to the work and the project aims. I'll outline the methods and go through some of the key results. I'll provide a summary and conclusions, and I'll also briefly mention some of our work on implementation. So to give some background, countries in Asia contribute nearly 2/3 of global egg production. The poultry industries are rapidly expanding in many of these countries, and the adoption and management of cage-free egg production systems is an emerging issue across the region. The aim of this project was to conduct producer-led research to investigate the main challenges that egg producers face in adopting and maintaining cage-free egg farms. The expected outcomes were to identify opportunities for engaging with and supporting egg producers. We used questionnaires, and the academic collaborators in each country sent electronic packages to egg producers, which included the study information, consent form, and questionnaire. We aimed for at least 10 cage producers and up to 10 cage-free producers for each country. However, due to the relative scarcity of commercial cage-free operations in these countries, the sample size was largely opportunistic. 224 egg producers were recruited into the study, and 202 participated through to completion. 108 of these were from Indonesia, and the rest were from China, the Philippines, Thailand, Japan, and Malaysia. 165 participants were from cage farms, and the remaining were from cage-free farms. We asked several questions, which were translated into the producers' local languages. On this slide are some examples of the questions we asked, including the challenges in adopting cage-free systems, some of the solutions to these challenges, and whether they need more support to adopt cage-free systems. The questions were mostly open-ended, and the data were analysed using thematic qualitative analysis, where the answers were grouped by themes. It was a large questionnaire with several results, so the data I'll focus on today will be the challenges experienced by cage-free egg producers and the solutions proposed by these cage-free egg producers. Also, I'll be presenting the data mostly as a summary for all countries, and we will be publishing 2 papers shortly with the full results. One has just been accepted in Frontiers in Veterinary Science. Egg producers were generally positive about the feasibility of cage-free egg production. I haven't included the data on this slide, but the majority of cage egg producers thought that cage-free systems were feasible. When we asked, do you think cage-free systems are an option in your country? 25% said yes, 40% said maybe, and only 35% said no. However, as you can see on this slide, almost all of the cage producers, 96% across all countries, thought that more support is needed to help them transition to cage-free systems than is currently available. Further, when we asked the existing cage-free producers if more support is needed to maintain their cage-free farms, the vast majority, or 81%, said yes. The next question focused on the overall challenges involved in operating cage-free farms. The top challenges identified were the cost of production as number one. As you can see here, it comprised 22% of all answers on this topic. Management of the system and disease came in second at 14%, followed by product sales and the production rate of eggs. And if you look at the breakdown of answers, many of the categories also relate to the cost of production, such as the presence of disease and the production rate of eggs, which make the cost of production an even greater challenge than is indicated here. The next question was a bit more specific. We asked them to score the difficulty of managing common animal welfare husbandry practices on a scale of 0 to 5, 5 being the most difficult. Preventing disease was viewed as the number one most difficult aspect of managing the cage-free farms, and half of all responses brought up disease prevention, as you can see here in this red column. The second most difficult aspects were maintaining litter quality, preventing smothering, which is a fear behaviour where birds crowd and can suffocate to death, and biosecurity. Preventing feather pecking and cannibalism came next, which is a widespread problem in the egg industry worldwide, a damaging behaviour where hens can injure and kill each other. When we asked the producers to propose solutions, they identified improving on-farm practices as the single most important solution for maintaining their farms. So as you can see here in this blue column, this comprised 36% of responses on the topic. This was followed by improved marketing at 17% of answers. The next question asked what type of support they needed. The top result was improving sales, followed by improving farm operations, the provision of information and training for producers, and lower farm costs. These last three responses in particular reflect the problems as well as the solutions that were identified. I haven't presented the next data visually, but on whom should provide the support, the government came in at the top by a large majority at almost 40% of answers, followed by the private sector and then industry stakeholders. The government was nominated as the top stakeholder in all countries but China. To give a quick summary of the results, the top three general challenges were the cost of production, system management, and disease. The top farm management challenges were preventing disease, maintaining good litter quality, and preventing damaging behaviours in the hens. 81% of cage-free producers said that more support is needed to maintain their farms. They identified improving on-farm practices as the single most important solution for maintaining their farms, followed by improved marketing. And they wanted support in improving sales, farm operations, and the provision of information and training for producers, as well as lower farm costs. The results of this study show a strong theme of needing to improve farm practices and a need for information and training for producers. The results provide important information to improve our understanding of cage-free egg production in the region, and also provides opportunities for engagement and the provision of enhanced support for egg producers. We incorporate our research findings into our projects wherever possible. For example, in our online training course for egg producers and in our training centres on cage-free production and management. Thank you for your attention, and please feel free to contact me with questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kate. That was an excellent talk, and I'm sure there'll be a number of questions on that at the end. We're running slightly ahead of time, but I think we'll kick off with the next speaker. So our final speaker for this session is Maria Chen from the University of British Columbia in Canada, and she will be speaking on sales and marketing of cage-free eggs in China, a multi-case study.
Hi everyone, my name is Maria and today I'll be sharing our case study about sales and marketing of cage-free eggs in China. First, I'd like to thank my funders, Open Philanthropy and Good Ventures. I'd also like to thank each participant who kindly shared their knowledge and experience with me. Imagine that, like me, you're a consumer in Shanghai, China, looking to buy eggs to make fried rice. You have many options for where to go: the nearby wet market, the supermarket, or online stores. With so many egg types like indigenous chicken egg, organic, and free range, which egg will you choose? Marketing strategies such as placement of eggs, packaging, and more all contribute to our purchase decision. But what does our purchasing decision have to do with animal welfare? Depending on the egg that we choose, we may be supporting the housing of hens living in caged environments or cage-free systems like indoor barns, aviary, or outdoor free range. Housing systems directly impact animal welfare. Though cage-free systems do not guarantee high welfare, well-designed and managed cage-free housing offer hens the potential to express important natural behaviors like perching, dust bathing, nesting, and socializing. In 2020, China raised 3.3 billion layer hens, producing 29.8 million tons of eggs, which is around 40% of the world's total. Even small changes to hen housing in China can affect the welfare of large amounts of animals. There appears to be some demand in China for cage-free eggs. Global concern for animal welfare has led to a shift away from cage systems, and more than 50 international food companies operating in China committed to sourcing 100% cage-free eggs by 2025. Consultancy firm Lever estimates this demand to be around 2.3 billion cage-free eggs per year. Chinese consumers have an existing preference for products labeled free range, though consultancy firm IQC's survey from 2020 reveals that around 80% of consumers surveyed were unfamiliar with the term cage-free, which is a term translated from English to Chinese. Despite this, most of China's hens are housed in cages. In 2017, approximately 90% of eggs are produced from conventional cages. 9% used outdoor free range, and only 1% used indoor cage-free housing. The successful sales and marketing of cage-free eggs may help promote housing which is potentially better for animal welfare. Our aim was to examine 6 companies producing and selling cage-free eggs in China to understand why these companies sell cage-free eggs and how they market these eggs. In order to conduct our multi-case study, I selected 6 companies anonymized as companies A to F. Within each company, I selected 1 to 3 individuals familiar with sales, such as managers and salespeople, resulting in 9 participants. For data collection, I conducted 2 to 4 online interviews with each participant, focusing on the company's marketing strategies. I collected online documents related to each company, for example, their online stores and egg packaging. I wrote critical reflections, including parts of the data which were similar, surprising, or contradicting. The resulting data included transcripts, documents, and field notes. All data were then organized into the program in vivo for qualitative analysis, where I identified common themes in the data. Currently, I'm still completing data collection, and so I will only present the preliminary results. I will now briefly introduce the companies. Companies A and B use indoor barns and productive commercial layer hen breeds. Both market their eggs as cage-free. Companies C, D, E, and F produce all of their eggs in free-range systems with outdoor access using local breeds. These products are marketed as free-range and indigenous chicken eggs. Companies A, C, and E have no background in agriculture, but started cage-free production because of an interest in producing good quality food. Company B is an international food company and is the only company in this sample who only produce some cage-free products. 99% of their eggs are caged eggs, while 1% are sold as cage-free shell eggs. They started this product to promote animal welfare as a concept in China and to test the market. Company D was crowdfunded by consumers around 10 years ago during a food safety crisis and so still has a stable consumer base. 3 companies received animal welfare certification from Certified Humane, a US-based NGO. 4 companies received Animal Welfare Award Good Egg Production Award from Compassion in World Farming, a UK-based NGO. The companies use 3 main marketing strategies: identifying target consumers, differentiating their product, and establishing trust. A first strategy included identifying the target consumer group. In contrast to cheaper eggs, which are below 1 RMB per egg sometimes, all companies in this study had higher prices ranging between 1.5 to 3 RMB per egg. All participants mentioned that consumers need to be willing and able to pay for their products. Companies A and B both produce eggs in indoor systems. A's selling point is cage-free and a trending selling point called edible raw, implying good food safety. Participant A2 describes the diverse consumer base. Our consumers are quite a mix: people born after 2000s, some single moms, elderly. They buy because the egg tastes good, is healthy. Very few care about animal welfare. They're not as aware of this concept. Company B is testing the market by only emphasizing cage-free and animal welfare, both concepts seen as more foreign concepts. Participant B2 shares, our main target audience is white-collar moms who are willing to pay more for their children, those who have been abroad, and young people who are more familiar with foreign concepts. For free-range eggs, participants shared consumers' affinity for freedom, nature, and wildlife. Participant D1 shares how city people are attracted to their products. Our clients, they mainly care about farming environment, like this is an emotional need. They think hens from organic environment is more positive, more free. People are envious, they don't even live as well as chicken, since they see the chicken running around freely in the woods. Participant E1 also shares, what do Chinese consumers from cities care about? Nature and ecological things, like what does the animal eat? Is the hen eating feed or real 5 grains and mixed foods? D1 further adds, we have 2 main types of consumers. One group purely cares about food safety. The other group, our farm is free range, so there's wild animals like badgers, wild boars. The natural environment is damaged and they have little to eat, so sometimes they steal our chickens. These consumers like wildlife, so they want to support us. Overall, the target consumer group often involves high-income earners, those who care about health and food safety, and naturalness, and sometimes animal welfare. A second marketing strategy is differentiating the egg product. for example with traits that can be directly experienced by the consumer, such as visuals and taste, and conceptual claims to differentiate the egg. Some companies produce visually distinct eggs, E1 shares. Some consumers want our green eggs. They can't easily find colorful eggs like this on the market. C1 shares. Our consumer feedback really centers on good mouthfeel, taste, and texture. All those external concepts, it's just to strengthen your consumer's belief in your product. He highlights how the product quality comes first, and additional concepts come after. Apart from consumer experience, companies also inform consumers why their product is different. For example, E1 describes their production methods as superior to other cage-free methods. Our forest farms are different. This should be even higher animal welfare, as it allows chickens the chance to return to their nature. Indoor cage-free is just changing a small cage to a large cage with controlled environments. Ours is more natural. In contrast, B3 shares how their indoor system is better than regular free-range. We are different from regular free-range eggs. We have professional staff, professional feed, space that is managed, not randomly walking on some floor or forest and eating randomly. B1 shares their efforts to educate consumers about animal welfare. We share with consumers about the 5 freedoms, like the hens can have natural behaviors. The consumers exist. It's about finding and shaping them. With increasing middle-income families, how can we get them to care about animal welfare? We need to figure out the messaging to hook these consumers. Overall, companies distinguish themselves through creating distinct products or informing consumers of their added value. Lastly, an important marketing strategy is developing consumer trust in the product. Multiple participants mentioned egg companies often made false claims. For example, F1 shared, "After I signed a contract with Supermarket S, they said, 'Stop giving me these expensive free-range eggs. We can't sell them. Can't you just buy some cheaper caged eggs from the egg market, then we can label it as free-range?'" In this context, companies use various strategies to increase transparency and consumer trust. Company C has QR codes on their packaging linked to their 24-hour live barn footage, as well as daily footstep counts of specific hens to indicate the hens are free-range. Company D even welcomes consumers to live on their farm. "We have a lodging area on our farm. People can experience picking eggs or feeding chickens. Then they develop a trusting relationship with us." I asked Company B, who uses indoor systems, how they develop trust, and B2 shares, "We sell at supermarkets which are legitimate. Branded eggs are more legitimate. We have a brand, so we won't do anything improper." Lastly, companies use assurance schemes to establish trust. F1 shares, "International organizations helped award me the Good Egg Production Award with 5 stars, referring to the Animal Welfare Award given by NGO Compassion in World Farming. And he helped promote my products. Now I can collaborate with Hotel H, who orders 1,500 eggs per week. It's not a lot, but it is a first step." Overall, companies increase trust by providing access to farm conditions such as cameras or farm visits or farm awards. My preliminary results suggest that some marketing strategies used by the 6 companies in my sample include identifying consumers, differentiating egg products, and establishing trust with clients and consumers. The sales of cage-free eggs may not only increase a production method which might benefit hens, but it may also serve the function of educating consumers about topics such as animal welfare. As the only product on the Chinese market currently associated with animal welfare, understanding the sales of these products may act as a case study for understanding the future sales of other high animal welfare products. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. I'd like to invite our three speakers to turn their cameras on, if possible. And then we can dive into some of these questions. Hi, Maria.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Kennedy.
Hi, I don't seem to be able to get my camera to turn on.
I can hear you. Stephen, would you be able to help with the camera situation?
Are you able to hear and see me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thanks, Maria.
So Vittoria, I sent you a webcam request.
In the chat?
We may just have to go with hearing Vittoria rather than actually having her camera on by the looks of it. I don't think she's going to be able to turn it on because I've sent the request and it's not going through, I think. So we might just have to press ahead as where we are.
No worries, that's all good. Thank you. Our first question is actually for you, Vittoria. So as long as you can still hear me okay. So how can we address the fact that for many members of the public and some ethicists and scientists, naturalness is an integral/inherent element of good welfare and which is impossible to achieve if missing?
So, I mean, I guess that is a crux. So that's a really important question, and I don't think we have the answer to how we can move forward. But I think one of the things that I would emphasize is that if we can find alternative ways of demonstrating positive welfare, and it may be that going forward, enclosures continue to have natural appearances, and even if, as I said in the talk, that some of the alternative non-natural looking stimuli would be as valuable for stimulating individuals, then it might be that zoos opt for that public perception of naturalness to continue using natural looking environments. But I guess the key element is that that naturalness isn't used in lieu of using some of these other behavioral indicators and using more effective assessments of affect and the perceptions of the individual animals and understanding subjective experiences. So I don't think that there's a harm necessarily in maintaining natural looking environments, but it's harmful when it's used in lieu of some more appropriate metrics. I think you're on mute, Kate.
Sorry. Do you think there'd be a role for greater public education in that space, in that area then, particularly when we're thinking about zoo animals or animals that are kept in other captive settings?
So I think there could be. I think there are a lot of zoos that do this. And actually, when we were doing our research, some of the stuff that came up that was related to involving citizen scientists, so members of the public to be observers for welfare, discuss some of the practicalities and the values of some of their educational programs. And a lot of studies find that even though they might have very good information available in billboards or in certain delivery systems, so some delivery systems are more effective than others, and citizen science is one of the more effective ways of communicating information to the public because they get involved with it. But unfortunately, they found that sort of education doesn't always correlate with people's perceptions. And I think, I don't really have any data to back this up, but I think that the public perceptions and that natural look will perpetuate even in the face of evidence that suggests that it is meaningless. So again, I don't think it's harmful to have those perceptions, and I don't know necessarily whether. I mean, I guess it depends on the cost. So if the cost of creating an environment that looks natural means that there isn't the funding to put towards having some of these more effective assessment measures, then it becomes a problem because it's a trade-off. But if a natural looking environment is not creating more costly problems, I mean, I guess one challenge might be, I think in my slides there are a couple of examples where animals are in these tube cages that allow them the choice from one enclosure to another. And these are positive, shown to be very positive for welfare, but they have these public perceptions of being negative because they show, they're putting animals in cages effectively. And I think that might be where a challenge of something that doesn't look as natural is going to have a negative public perception, when in actual fact it's much better for welfare. And that might be a place where education can help.
Great, thank you, Victoria. So just jumping to a question for Kate now. So how likely are the egg producers going to get the government support that they're asking for?
How likely are they to get the government support?
Yeah.
Well, that's a tricky question. It was actually a very interesting result because there are so many stakeholders in each country and so many different types of stakeholders that we didn't ask them about. So that was an open-ended question, and they nominated the stakeholders themselves that they thought should provide the support that they were talking about. And it was a really interesting result, particularly that China was the only country that didn't ask for support from the government. And we were trying to figure out why exactly that was the case for China as opposed to the other countries. And we wondered maybe if it's because the government is also already very involved in the industry and they've been doing a lot in the last, several years to support the industry in various ways, particularly focusing on production. So in China, the government working on intensifying the industries and improving production, particularly in areas where there may be lower income. They really support farmers. And so, it wasn't really to say that the government wasn't important in that country, but just maybe that, the government maybe was already supporting them. So that was like something that we were wondering about, but we haven't gone into looking at those in more detail. So a nice thing to do from this study would be to sort of jump off and investigate some of these results a little bit more. But to actually answer your question, it's obviously very dependent on the country in terms of how much support they'll get from a stakeholder like the government. And it's it's kind of something that my organization, Global Food Partners, works across eight different countries. We focus heavily on those, including China and Indonesia, the really big egg producers. And we try and avoid, making these statements about the whole region because there's so much, difference between different countries in that region. So it does vary a lot, and there's quite a difference between countries in terms of how much support the government has already given, or how much, they might be releasing animal welfare standards themselves, or it might be more that the corporates are involved. So for example, in Thailand, there are some very large organizations or food companies that are already going cage-free. So I think it just depends so much on the particular country, and I couldn't comment on how likely the government would be to give support. Sorry.
No worries, thank you. And a question for you, Maria. What do you think the future will look like for consumer trends in Chinese markets?
Thank you so much. That's a great question. So I think, excuse me, I think my colleague Julia, who is also part of this research team, she's actually doing a study focused on that, on the consumer perceptions of cage-free eggs in China. And I guess right now in the market, there are two broad categories for the eggs. One is the more cheaper eggs, as I described, that's around 1 RMB per egg. So there is a large population that is demanding this kind of egg just for everyday purchase. But there are also high-end products, and those are really, some of them are 3 times more expensive as the regular egg product, which is quite a high increase. So that's a different consumer niche, I guess. So in the future, as there's more middle income and higher income families, I think that there would be bigger potential for these products to be able to be afforded by the consumers. So I think that if the companies are able to work on really addressing the points that touch the consumers, this would be a really great opportunity to even educate consumers about concepts like animal welfare, which is currently not as widely accepted.
We've got another question coming through that I think will actually appeal to possibly all 3 of you. So one, how much overlap exists between our perception of naturalness and actual welfare benefits for the animals? So I'm not sure who wants to answer first or share their thoughts.
Can I jump in? Because I was also going to tag on to the end of what Maria was saying about the cost of eggs. Really great presentation, Maria, by the way. Really interesting and great to hear all that information about the industry and consumers. In terms of cost of eggs, this is something that comes up a lot in our work as well, seeing producers that are transitioning to cage-free systems for the first time and working out the systems. And the cost, like Maria said, can be a lot higher for the producers as well as the consumers. And it's something that we've seen in other regions of the world going cage-free already, and having done this over several years, is that experience with the system and training and capacity building, and just there's a study actually that came out just last year about this. The increasing experience with this system results in decreasing mortality rates on the farms, and so they can really, by implementing the best management practices, reduce things like mortality rates and increase food conversion ratios, and increase the profitability of the farms, and help to minimize or lower the cost of eggs a lot. So I just wanted to add that little bit. But in terms of the actual question that just came through in terms of the natural living, I would just say that, as we know, with those 3 scientific frameworks that can be used to help with the assessment of animal welfare, there's natural living is, one of them that can be considered, and then biological function and effective states. And I think it's important to consider all of them, and the best kinds of studies do sort of incorporate them, or at least consider them in tandem. So rather than just looking at one, making sure that so for example, with layer hens, there's perches which behaviorally or natural living, they can sleep on, they can roost on them at night. Effective states, they have affects things like on things like reducing fearfulness, and then biological function, they increase leg strength. So it's kind of thinking about them all. And chickens are very different to zoo animals, because it's just more of a challenge of actually giving them any kind of enrichment, but making sure it fulfills all of those needs.
Thanks, Kate. Maria or anything you'd like to add to that?
I'm happy to jump in next. So I think it's obviously context dependent, and there are studies that have looked at the the quality and comparing. So there's naturalness with regard to the enclosure, and then there's naturalness in terms of the enrichments that are provided, which are quite different. And then you have the layer of like assessing naturalness in terms of using it as an indicator. And I think those are very different problems and very different questions. But in terms of the perceptions, I think that understanding the life history of the animals and understanding like what they need and what their biological functioning is in the wild circumstances can help inform the way that we can provide the enrichments or provide the conditions in the enclosures that are positive. In as I was talking about with bears, for example, then they providing what they have in the wild is not something that's feasible in a zoo environment. And for better or worse, they're in that zoo environment, and there are sort of enrichments that can be provided that are more important than having a natural looking enclosure. And so I think there are certain perception challenges, and where everything being equal, if the cost of having natural looking enclosures which have positive public perception as well is not reducing the positive welfare impacts of the actual stimuli or the actual enclosure itself, then I think that it's sort of a neutral impact. But where perception is guiding institutions to move away from some of the more positive stimuli or more positive enclosures that are actually better for the animals themselves, then it becomes this conflict.
Great, thank you. And Maria, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'd first like to actually correct what I said a little bit earlier, which is the lack of familiarity of animal welfare. I just want to clarify that the term animal welfare is translated directly from English into Chinese. So this term might have slightly less familiarity, even though research in recent years has shown that this term is becoming more familiar. There is a lot of traditional values that emphasize a caring for nature and compassion towards animals as well. So there is this existing cultural tradition of caring for nature and ecology, and this is also evident in the participants. And I think this ties a bit back to naturalness and animal welfare, in that right now there are two main systems for cage-free. One is free range and outdoor, and might seem to consumers more of what they imagine as a natural environment for chickens. I think in terms of sales and marketing, this is more in alignment with what people might commonly assume of a natural free-range chicken. So for the indoor systems, it reminds me of what Vittoria said, which is about sometimes the conditions doesn't look so natural, but animals might actually be able to address similar behavioral needs. But some companies who are using indoor systems have shared how it is a struggle to convey to the consumers who are looking for this natural, when they associate chickens as living in this natural life as being better. So it is a struggle to convey that, yes, in this indoor, more factory looking system, it is also possible to achieve these aspects. So I think there is definitely a disconnect with, oh, hi. Yeah, there's definitely a disconnect there that maybe a bit more consumer education and marketing needs to happen there.
Thank you so much. I'm guessing Kat's jumped on because we're about to run over time.
I just had a real quick question before we finish, but Maria, what does animal welfare translate into in Chinese languages? Like, what is that word? Yeah.
Okay, I can teach it to you. So animal welfare is literally translated. Animal is 动物. So 动物 is animal, and then welfare is 福利. So actually, when you mention this to some friends who might be less familiar, they might just assume welfare as human welfare, so that's a completely different word, and maybe even associated with employee welfare, like getting a bonus at the end of the year. So it's quite important just to get everyone on the same page, because probably the concept of caring for animals is very familiar, but if there is a new term, then there might be misunderstandings, but doesn't mean that people don't care about it.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you so much, and thank you so much to all our speakers, and thank you to Kate for chairing the session. It's been fantastic, but I do have to come in now and say it's break time. So please use this time, 15 minutes, to get something to drink, something to eat, go to the bathroom, and we'll see you back in 15 minutes for our next session, which will be focused on managing for better animal welfare. So we'll see you then. Thanks.
Thanks so
Thanks
much.
very much. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.